An urgent call with Washington occurred following the meeting of the Coalition of Willing in Kyiv today. Let me remind you, today Zelensky met with Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Donald Tusk and Friedrich Merz. And during this phone conversation, the most important thing that happened was that Zelensky agreed to direct negotiations with the Russians. If they support the ceasefire regime for 30 days, as stated, Ukraine and all its allies are ready for a complete, unconditional ceasefire on land, in the air, and at sea for at least 30 days. And so Donald Trump in this conversation fully supported this idea, and not only supported it, but also stated that the United States is truly ready to take on the monitoring of the ceasefire regime. And if Russia refuses this truce, then the United States, together with the Europeans, is ready to introduce additional sanctions. And crucially, to boost military aid to Ukraine. Let's discuss in this episode the conference call between European leaders Zelensky and Donald Trump, and very importantly, let's also discuss with you another interesting point. Because Trump has already started complaining about Putin and is surprised by the strike on children in Ukraine. In particular, Trump is disappointed that he was not able to quickly end the war in Ukraine. According to him, resolving it turned out to be more difficult than he thought, and the main reason is the dictator Putin. My name is Alexei Pecci. Today is May 10th on the calendar. Let's go through everything step by step. So, after the coalition meeting, European leaders, together with President Zelensky today, held a phone conversation with United States President Donald Trump regarding peace efforts. And as stated by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andrei Sybiga, further quote, after the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing in Kyiv, all five leaders, Volodymyr Zelensky, Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz, Donald Tusk and Keir Starmer, held a productive phone conversation with United States President Donald Trump about peace efforts. Ukraine and all its allies are ready for a complete unconditional ceasefire on land, in the air and at sea for at least 30 days, starting as early as Monday, May 12th. According to him, if Russia agrees and effective monitoring is ensured, a prolonged ceasefire and confidence-building measures could pave the way for peace negotiations. As mentioned in the previous episode, if you haven't watched it, go to the channel, subscribe and watch it. 4 leaders of Ukraine's allied countries arrived in Kyiv. This is the first joint visit of the leaders of 4 countries to Ukraine. The new Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, during his visit to Kyiv, called for a ceasefire and threatened the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin with sanctions. Further, his quote, "We call for a 30-day ceasefire so that during this time peace negotiations can be prepared. Now the ball is in Putin's court and he must respond to this proposal." He cautioned that if the Kremlin refuses a truce, the West, including Europe and the United States, is prepared to respond severely. According to him, the United States and President Donald Trump personally support this approach, probably because they are losing patience with Putin. In this regard, the Chancellor of Germany emphasized that there is currently, quote, a surprisingly high level of agreement between Europe and the United States. Well, and here we already have insiders. Sources in the White House state that Ukraine and all its allies have informed Trump that they are ready for a complete ceasefire. And 2 sources familiar with the conversation reported that Zelensky and European leaders told Trump that if a ceasefire agreement is reached, Ukraine is ready to begin direct peace talks with Russia. According to sources, they emphasized in their conversation with Trump that if Putin refuses a 30-day ceasefire, European countries will impose new sanctions against Russia. And, according to one of the sources, Trump apparently was satisfied that Ukraine accepted the ceasefire agreement and agreed to direct negotiations with Russia. A second source said that Trump was glad to hear that they all support his proposal. Now, as Trump stated, we are waiting for Russia's actions. And right after this conversation with Donald Trump, with European leaders and Zelensky, it became known that the United States, Europe, and Ukraine, in fact, set a deadline for Putin to agree to a ceasefire. And here comes an interesting moment, because after this phone conversation, Zelensky thanked his American colleague Donald Trump for supporting Ukraine and said that there are 3 things for which we are definitely grateful. This is military aid, this is intelligence data, and sanctions against Russia. Next, I will quote Zelensky. I am grateful to President Trump that he did not stop, and today American aid is coming, that he did not stop the exchange of intelligence data. This is vital for us during the defense of the sky. Zelensky also thanked the United States president for the American sanctions against Russia, which Trump did not stop. As Zelensky says, "I am really counting on their strengthening." Ukraine is working with the United States at different levels and has a productive dialogue with President Trump and a connection with his team. We are very grateful for this, and we thank the teams, the leaders, and the leaders personally present who are constantly communicating, working with the United States of America, partners in constant communication with Washington, said President Zelensky. Well, and further, Zelensky briefly commented on the results of the phone conversation with Trump. Quote, "Just now, we all spoke together with President Trump. We agreed on our common view. Our next step is a complete and unconditional ceasefire, which is very necessary. Responsibility for refusal is very necessary. In the conditions of such a ceasefire, it is necessary for Putin to bear responsibility. We can jointly agree on the foundation for advancing peace." Well, and against this background, today we have reports that United States President Donald Trump is disappointed that he was not able to quickly end the war in Ukraine. According to him, resolving it turned out to be more difficult than he thought, and the main reason for this is the dictator Putin. So according to those who attended his club in Florida last week, speaking before a group of leading Republican Party donors, Trump called ending Russia's war against Ukraine a growing disappointment, which keeps him up at night. And so, according to one of those present, Trump said that it was especially difficult to negotiate with the head of the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin, and that he wanted to get everything entirely, meaning Ukraine. But he means Putin. His words were in response to a question from one of the sponsors about what concerns him most in foreign policy. Well, as he writes now, however, after 100 days of his second term, neither of the conflicts, neither the war in Ukraine nor in the Gaza Strip, has come any closer to resolution. Negotiations to end Iran's nuclear program have reached a deadlock, and the trade war is straining relations with allies. Trump discovered that solving global problems is more difficult than he thought. Glamour and theatrics play their part in diplomatic acts, but details and hard work are just as important. This is what Dan Beyer, a former ambassador in the Obama administration who now works at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, says. White House Press Secretary Anna Kelly stated that Trump and his team were focused on ensuring peace throughout the world and to hinder bad actors to cause harm to Americans and our allies. As she says, their approach succeeded. The Houthis agreed to a ceasefire. 47 Americans who had been detained abroad have returned home. NATO countries are increasing their defense spending, China is holding back, and we are closer than ever to peace in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Well, it's important to note here that in recent weeks, Trump has privately told advisors that Putin does not want to end the war and that both sides are refusing to compromise. Trump has also asked advisors whether they think Putin has changed since the last time Trump was in office. And he expressed surprise at some of Putin's military actions, including the bombing of peaceful cities and civilian areas with children. Earlier this year, Trump said that, in his opinion, Kiev would be harder to convince than Russia, unless the terms of the deal were Ukraine's terms. What led to a confrontation in the Oval Office with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the end of February? Just recently, senior officials in the Trump administration admitted that Russia remains the main obstacle, refusing to agree to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire, which Kiev has already supported, and instead demanding additional concessions from Ukraine. And as J.D. Vance stated at the Munich Security Forum event in Washington on Wednesday, quote, "I wouldn't say that the Russians are not interested in ending the conflict. We believe that they are asking for too much." Well, and moving on. Vance directly stated that it's very strange when the Kremlin demands that Ukraine give up those territories that Russians have never actually occupied. Trump's earlier plans for resolving the war were also disrupted over the course of several weeks. Russia complained about Trump's first envoy to Ukraine, Akita Kellogg, because the daughter of the retired general supports Kiev. And they say, like, Kid Kellogg is too pro-Ukrainian, so he needs to be removed. And then Trump ordered Kellogg to speak only with Ukrainians and appointed Kiva Vitkov, his longtime friend who had served as envoy to the Middle East, to his place. And so Vitkov started visiting Putin from that time on. Kellogg and his team claimed that the diplomat was effective in getting Kyiv to accept Trump's peace process. Virkov, as he writes, repeatedly forced both sides to accept terms that did not suit them. And now Vitkov told others that he just wants to bring both sides to the negotiating table, which he has not been able to do so far. Other American officials also suggested that Trump might consider his job done if he gets the Russians and Ukrainians to start serious direct negotiations. At the same time, what happens after that will depend on them, which would allow the United States to focus on other priorities. Trump's primary goal is to bring Ukraine and Russia to the negotiating table, leaving them to resolve the conflict independently afterward. But now, as you can see, the position is changing a little because Trump has actually started to coordinate his actions and plans with the Europeans. And today's announcement is in fact an ultimatum to the Kremlin that Ukraine is declaring the start of a ceasefire from June 12th. If Putin disagrees, sanctions will be imposed. This shows the White House's views have shifted slightly. But let's see what happens on June 12th. I'll put an ellipsis here. Write your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and don't forget to leave a like.